Annisa just completed her PhD in the Culture Studies in Asia program here at NUS, and she is now a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Communications and New Media here. So please join me to welcome Annisa.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. Okay, let me just start my presentation. My presentation focuses on the question on how social media influencers, or in this case, Indonesian young women, I call them religious influencers, act as digital citizens. This paper is a follow-up case study after I did my field work in 2015-2016 in Indonesia about young Muslim women's groups there. Engin Isin and Evelyn Rupert proposes that any attempt at theorizing digital citizens ought to begin with the historical figure of the citizen before even shifting focus to the digital. Agreeing with them, I would like to discuss briefly first how young women have acted as citizens in Indonesia. In the 1980s, tens of female high school and university students were involved in series of protests that went on for almost a decade, fighting against a ministerial order called SK 052 or SK 52, stipulated by President Suharto's authoritarian New Order regime, which practically banned female students to don the veil with their school uniform. Only in February 1991, with increasing pressure from society and the rise of Muslim middle class and intellectuals, the ministerial order was finally replaced by a new one called SK 100, allowing Muslim women to don their veils with their school uniform. In the early 1990s, it was Muslim youth study groups usually called pengajian, that helped propel anti-authoritarian sentiments and at the same time struggled against President Suharto's developmentalist modernity in favor for a more purist Islamic lifestyle. Suzanne Brenner, in her seminal article, notes how for young women in universities then, donning the veil and transforming themselves into better Muslims were fundamental to their social and political struggle. In 1998, the year when Suharto's New Order regime finally fell down after 32 years, a group called Suara or Voice of Concerned Mothers played a key role alongside young women and young men as well in protesting against the regime. Since 1998, Indonesia slowly, as perhaps most of you know, transformed itself into a very visibly pious Muslim majority country. Interestingly, the role of young Muslim women in socio-political movements in Indonesia seemed to be neutralized and represented instead by a slow and steady growth of women's involvement in formal politics through political parties or through NGOs. Different from their predecessors in the 80s and 90s, young Muslim women who are not involved in formal politics today have been increasingly portrayed instead as leading the fashion industry. Young women have led changes in creative industry in Indonesia, both as fashion designers or as social media influencers with massive following. They are pretty, they are productive, they're entrepreneurial, and they are successful. My focus, however, is not on how they have become successful in fashion industry. My concern is more on how their influence on non-economic arenas have been overlooked. And this is a problem because when we overlook the influence of young women, what they have for their followers, we are overlooking how politics is lived today. To be able to show you what I'm talking about, I will juxtapose the roles that young Muslim women play in the tragic downfall of Basuki Purnama between 2016 and 2017. Basuki Purnama, or more well known as Ahok, was the governor of Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, from 2014 to 2017. Being a Christian Chinese Indonesian, his leadership then was often thought as the pinnacle of Jakarta's and often Indonesia's diversity. His downfall started when a video was uploaded in late September 2016 of him suggesting that voters should not use the Quran chapter Al-Ma'idah 51. At that time, he was a candidate also of the upcoming Jakarta gubernatorial election in 2017. Ahok said, "In your inner hearts, you may not vote for me because you have been lied to," using Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 51. So, if you cannot vote for me because you are afraid of being condemned to hell, you do not need to feel uneasy because as you are being fooled. The verse is often interpreted to dissuade Muslims from having non-Muslim leaders. His statement then was seen as a representation of a moral crisis, as it seemed to question the authority of the Quran, the Holy Book, therefore indicating a blasphemous act. It was also seen as questioning the authority of the religious teachers or religious scholars, more often labeled as ulama in Indonesia, although there are other different names, whose position amongst Indonesian Muslims have always been highly respected. This video went viral through channels and means that I cannot discuss right now. By early October 2016, news and debates regarding this matter were non-stop. Popular Muslim groups and organizations filed official reports against him. By 16 November 2016, less than 2 months after the video was uploaded, Ahok was named suspect of a blasphemy case. This clearly jeopardized him as a candidate of the Jakarta gubernatorial election in February 2017, which was barely 4 months later. Perhaps some of you know, after 2 rounds of election in February and April 2017, he lost. And on 9 May 2017, he was found guilty of the blasphemy case and was sentenced for 2 years in jail. Within this period, there were 2 significant movements that brought about Ahok's downfall, other than the election themselves. First is the 4th November movement, or 411, 14, and the 2nd December movement, or 212. On both dates, images like this circulated. 2 Muslim organizations, FPI and FME, played a key role in the imagination of the Muslim community coming together against Ahok. Both movements were later proved to be significant for the victory of Anies Baswedan, which was Ahok's rival in the running for gubernatorial election at that time. Muslim men were clearly depicted to be in the foreground of the movement. It was rather predictable that the role that women played in the significant political changes were overlooked. The fight against the fatal ban that I have showed you have been rarely discussed until today as a significant political challenge against the authoritarian new order. After 1998, it was mainly just feminist scholars in Indonesia who point out the role of women in leading pro-democratic movement that helped topple Suharto. So similarly, in the case of anti-Ahok movement in Jakarta back in 2016-2017, political movement and public contention against the incumbent were often seen as gender neutral, because this is the imaginary that we like, right? of Muslims in white coming together as a sea of people just going together, gender neutral, this one entity. When it was rather obvious, there were very strong tendency to focus on male figures. This narrow focus, I think, made it rather impossible for us to have a more nuanced understanding of what happened or what was communicated on the ground that brought forward the downfall of Ahok, particularly how youth, and not only the older visibly pious men, played a key role in this political shift. Youth were 1.3 million voters out of total 7.1 million eligible voters in Jakarta in 2017. And surveys and polls also showed that some youth in Jakarta were clearly sympathetic to the anti-Ahok movement. This is where I think understanding social media influencer political influence becomes important. I refer to Crystal Abidin's definition of social media influencers as a form of micro-celebrity, mostly young women, who accumulate a following on blogs and social media through the textual and visual narrative of their personal and everyday lives, upon which paid advertorials for products and service are premised. Influencers make use of selfies for financial gains as well as for self-actualization. Adding to her work, I propose the notion of religious influencers to be able to talk about young women who mobilize their followers, not just for commercial reasons, but also encouraging their followers to better themselves religiously. There are three famous young Muslim women influencers that I want to focus on to be able to address my concern regarding the involvement of young women in politics. Dian, Putri, and Gita have total 5.9 million followers combined on Instagram only. What they do to influence their followers cannot be overlooked. Obviously, not all social media influencers in Indonesia are political, but these three were clearly involved in creating public opinion about and against Ahok. Let me explain further what I meant. There were 26 posts uploaded on Instagram and YouTube by Dian, Gita, and Putri between October 2016 to April 2017 that clearly indicated their political preference and concerns. They did not shy away from showing that they were anti-Ahok and supported another candidate. I have to note, however, that my goal is not to see how their influence could be directly translated to votes. My goal is to see how these young women communicated their political interests and concerns in ways that are often undermined and seen as too mundane, and how these religious influencers made claims as digital citizens. I categorized these posts into two phases. First was the phase of addressing moral crisis from October to December 2016. The second phase was on the Jakarta gubernatorial election period from February to April 2017. In the first phase, for instance, Putri and Dian openly supported the 4th November and the 2nd December movement. Their followers even engaged and reacted to their captions as if they were praying together to fight against Ahok. The second phase, from February to April 2017, is the election phase. This is the phase when all of them directly addresses the importance of their followers to vote against Ahok during the election. This took different forms. Most notably was one when Dian and Putri, for instance, used the hashtag Muslim Vote Muslim consistently. The other form is in a more dramatic statement, as Putri did on that side, with her short video about giving voice. The video was titled Suara, or a voice, a message from a child of a nation to the motherland, if I could translate it roughly. The other form is through, on this side, a discussion on video blog or vlog that Gita uploaded. In this video, Gita talked with a friend casually, discussing the dangers of voting for a morally questionable leader, clearly in reference to Ahok, although they never stated blatantly. Since I'm unable to go too much in details of my analysis, let me go straight to what I think are the key features of how these religious influencers will engage with their political concerns and participate in politics. First, I think, is what I call aesthetic contention. This refers to both visual and textual. As social media influencers, all three of them were skillful in generating posts that are visually pleasing. They are also capable of choosing and using words and creating claims that do not sound too pushy or too forceful. They are not angry like their male counterparts, as you've seen in the previous picture from newspapers. The images, the captions, the words that they chose work together to create such an alluring, inviting, easily digestible claims that are, although clearly political in nature, manage to sound soft and engaging. They use, perhaps for lack of a better term, vernacular modes of expressing themselves. Their posts are clearly skillfully edited, but made in such a way that connects also to their followers' daily concern. They use emotive particles in sentences to sound friendly and to make discussion less intense, although not less effective. They prefer to use fashionable photos of themselves or dramatic photos of landscapes with religious commentaries as caption, instead of the usual angry signs you would see in protests against Ahok by their male counterparts. I will give examples if I have time. First, in a vlog titled Berislam, or Islamizing, by Gita, featuring her friend here, Rizka, which was uploaded in March 2017 and watched by, has 176,000 viewers. The timing in March 2017 is significant as the first round of election just ended, and the second one would happen in April 2017. So the video was uploaded right smack in the middle of this period. More importantly, Gita could be seen repeatedly making claims on how good young Muslims, who are her followers, should conduct themselves in times of moral crisis, right? This represented by Ahok's winning or chances in the election. Throughout their discussion, these two young women uses informal Indonesian language and words, slangs, and most importantly, emotive particles. For instance, when they discuss the importance of voting, Gita uses the emotive particle in Indonesian sih, as you can see, penting sih. And then her friend said, penting banget. So this exchange goes on and on as they say something really important and then undermine it with the emotive particle, which everyday Indonesians also use to not be too forceful when they're making claims. So their conversation flows naturally. It wasn't easy to follow a conversation by two young women who just converse as friends. They do not over-intellectualize this topic, and their message is clear. The video was also uploaded at exactly the right moment when the stake of the gubernatorial election was really high. The second example can be seen on these Instagram posts. Let me use Putri and Dian's post here during the election month of February. About 1 week before the election, 15th of February, they posted exactly on the same date, 9th February, using the same exact caption from the Hadith or the Prophet's sayings. And they use it, the hashtag Muslim vote Muslim there. The YouTube post that Gita uploaded that I just showed you and the two Instagram posts here by Putri and Dian clearly demonstrates their capacities that make an influencer skillful. They use editing, they use good captions, they use nice and easily digestible words, and they use it for political purposes. This, I think, is an important mode of expressing social and political contention for young women in Indonesia. The second feature, I think, can be seen as they condition themselves as influencer first, not people who are politically engaged first. As I said, they only have 26 posts combined on their Instagram and YouTube that address this political issue against Ahok. That doesn't seem to be a lot, in contrast to their total posts, which at this point comes to thousands, and Dian Pelangi even has 4,000 posts by now. My point is rather that they use their platform that they have already mastered, and following that, they're able to use the platform they mastered to address their political interests only when they want to and the way they know how to. Considering the number of followers, it would not make sense for them to drive a partisan political interest too intensely. It would be too big of an economic risk even for their jobs as influencers. And I would argue the political posts were not made because they want to jump into political debate. Their concerns, rather, were mostly closely related to their religious concerns and interests. So, coming to the end of my presentation, these two features, I think, are how young Muslim women and religious influencers act as creative digital citizens. They make claims and express their contentions and went out of their usual self-presentation as influencers to be able to express their political concerns. However, similar to their predecessors' invisibility in political stage and political analysis, these young women's role in political shift until today remain undermined.